Hello and welcome to the Gnostic Warrior podcast, broadcasting from GnosticWarrior.com in San Diego, California, to around the world. I'm your host, Mo, and today on the show, I have the honor of interviewing author, 32nd degree Freemason, and an expert on the Bavarian Illuminati, Joseph Wages. Joe is the author of The Secret School of Wisdom, The Authentic Rituals and Doctrines of the Illuminati. He is also one of the first people in the world to travel to Germany to peer into the secret archives of Adam Weishaupt's Bavarian Illuminati, and what he found is genuinely fascinating. It's truly a tale of great Masonic work. And you'll really enjoy this illuminating podcast. But before we get into the show, I have a word from our sponsors. The coronavirus is wreaking havoc upon the world, causing problems everywhere. The experts at Virus Safe Solutions have developed testing, disinfection services, and professional training for governments and businesses all over the globe. If you or your company needs assistance dealing with the coronavirus or you need a plan, please give the pros at Virus Safe Solutions a call at 619-586-5630 or visit them online at virussafesolutions.com. Again, that number is 619-586-5630 or visit their website at virussafesolutions.com. If you need a great and safe disinfectant to clean and protect yourself against the coronavirus and any of those unseen forces that seek to attack you, then you're going to want to get Pure Hydrogen Peroxide. It's made with food-grade hydrogen peroxide with no stabilizers or toxins, and it's one of the most powerful and safest disinfectants to kill the coronavirus. Do not use bleach, which is highly toxic and can cause severe respiratory problems for humans and pets, but instead use Pure Hydrogen Peroxide, safe for you, your pets, and the environment. Use code number 33 and get 10% off your next order by calling 760-237-0767 or visit them online at purehydrogenperoxide.com. Again, you can call them and get your bottle at 760-237-0767 or visit them online at purehydrogenperoxide.com. And don't forget to use code number 33 to get 10% off your next order. And now it's time for the Gnostic Warrior podcast. Welcome to the Gnostic Warrior. How are you doing today, Joe?
I'm doing pretty good today, Mo. How about you?
I'm doing awesome. Thank you. With this coronavirus happening here, it's pretty crazy. How's everything happening for you there where you're living?
Well, it's not too bad. Tried to go to the store the other night, and there's no toilet paper. So oddly, I went into Dallas to get it, which is strange because you would think the big city wouldn't have it, but they did.
Yeah, my wife was just at the store. We shop on Fridays, and she said she actually sent me pictures. They were completely empty, the shelves. So it's the toilet paper apocalypse, huh?
Yeah, at least in Texas it is. And then the doomsday prepper people have got the rice and beans gone too. But, other than that, it's pretty much mostly normal.
Let's talk about your great work, but before we get into that, there might be some people that are listening around the world that have not heard about you. So why don't you give them a quick biography of your path up until now?
Yeah, so I'm a Freemason, 32nd degree. Pretty much I love research, and kind of what my goal is before I hit 40, I want to do every major 18th century high degree system, the original rituals of them, and publish them and put them into print. And I think it's a worthy endeavor on the grounds that really you can't study any of these systems. Like, you can look externally at things, maybe looking at their minutes or what other people have said on it, but without actually being able to have access to the original systems. And if you think about it, like any type of organization, whether it be spiritual, magical, Masonic, whatever, you really can't gain a sense of what the point of that system is without analyzing what the rituals and teachings and doctrines and so forth are. And that's kind of what my goal is here. So all the things that have been kind of shrouded in mystery, that's my goal. And so like my first foray into that whole quest was basically to go and do the Illuminati system, because it's kind of like the Ferrari of things, right? Like it's the most rare and exotic system that's out there that no one knew anything about, and just kind of started from there. And then we've got a book on the Lou Cohen coming up, Rectified Scottish Rite, and we're talking the original system, not the post like 1802 stuff, but the original one as devised by Villermoz. We're doing that one. I've got stuff going on the ancient accepted Scottish Rite. So the first incantation of it's the Elu Parfait, then it's the Order of the Royal Secret. And so I've been working in conjunction with the Supreme Council in France and our Supreme Council here in the United States. And I've got basically all the correspondence coming out from 1745 to about 1767. All the early variant rituals going back to 1745, running all the way up to the Order of the Royal Secret. And so we're just kind of filling in the blanks on this system, because once you start doing things like that, you really start to see how systems grow and evolve and what they're built on, but more importantly, how do they change over time?
That's awesome. You walk the talk. You just don't want to read about it. You actually want to experience it. And this research, these documents, are the actual documents coming from Bavaria in Germany at the time, and are they original, or can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I could maybe take a step back, like how I even got going on the Illuminati thing. So
Sure.
Some like podcast or something I was listening to or something like that, and like they were talking about the Illuminati, and I never heard about anything about this group. And so the only things at that point in time in English that you could understand were were like Proofs of a Conspiracy, which is John Robison's book in 1798, and then also Memoirs on the History of Jacobinism, which was translated in 1799, but originally authored in 1798 at the same time as Proofs of a Conspiracy by Augustine Barruel. And so you read these two books, and you start looking at their footnotes. Well, the first one I got was Proofs of a Conspiracy, and then so I started to want to kind of check out these things. And so the German books that he references, when you look like in the footnotes of the names of the manuscripts, or not manuscripts, the books that he references, it's horribly rendered German, not spelled correctly. And so, raises flags about the scholarship that's involved in this thing. And so at that point in time, you really couldn't get these books because they were rare, and it was prior to Google Books going out there and digitizing everything. I think they had just started at this point. And so what I did was I paid research students to go to various rare book libraries and just photograph them for me. And so once I read all these things, I got a pretty good sense that the things that were being written in these books weren't legitimate, and that further scholarship needed to be done. And ultimately, it led me to partnering up with Reinhard Markner, who's one of the leading Masonic scholars in Germany. And all the Illuminati papers that are stored at this thing called the Secret State Archives in Berlin. And so they're all in this thing, like this 20-volume set called the Schwedenkiste, right? Or the Swedish box or Swedish chest, however you want to look at it. And what it is, it's the second guy who took over after Weishaupt fled. It's this guy named Johann Christoph von Bode. And Bode, when he died in 1793, his papers went to Duke Ernst II. And then when he died, it went to Sweden, is where they sent all this stuff to. And it stayed in Sweden until like the 1880s. And then the Germans wanted it back. And so they sent all the stuff back. And it's like 20 volumes, 1,000 pages in each one. Now, as far as rituals go, they're mainly concentrated in Volume 8 and Volume 9. So basically, you've got about 2,000 pages of like all the rituals, and it's all like the variant forms of it too, because, much like we talked about the Scottish Rite, how it evolved, this system evolves also. But what the good news is that it's the official ritual copies that are written down, and then they're copied and passed out to the different branches and chapters and so forth. So it's a pretty reliable source. And so what we did is we took every variant example we had, not only in the Schwedenkiste, but there's also copies in Hamburg and Frankfurt. And we took all those different variant forms of it, transcribed it all, compared them side by side, doing textual criticism, because, like little things like get copied or mistakes happen, or maybe someone, as they're copying, they don't like the way something reads, so they kind of modify it a little bit. And what you end up doing is when you do textual criticism on all the variant copies, you're able to work your way back to what did the original manuscript say before it was copied and things were changed or added or forgotten or dropped or substituted and so forth. And then that's how you really can kind of get a grasp of what's going on in this system.
Yeah, so you basically heard about the Illuminati. Were you a Freemason at that time, or this was prior to your Masonry?
Yeah, this is prior to me being a Freemason. I just heard about it and I thought it was kind of fascinating because, allegedly they're the guys running the world. I was like, well, hey, I want to know more about these people. And so I started kind of looking it up and I was like, oh, this is junk. Okay.
Yeah. So have you always been like that? I mean, since you were a child, or?
Yeah, just real inquisitive. And plus I like challenges, and I like things that are like seemingly impossible, right? Because think about it. It's like to try and tackle every major 18th century high degree system, that's a really ambitious project, right? And then, so as I got going along, I took German 4 years in high school, 4 years in college. And so I didn't have a problem with the German language and working your way back through 18th century German, particularly the Bavarian dialect. You get a lot of spellings that are weird. You get some words kind of like we don't use heretofore, hitherto, and things like that in our modern speech. They have a lot of things like that, but it's like anything, right? You just learn what are the variants, and then you learn how to account for it. And also in the Bavarian stuff, they would have Latin words and Latinized spellings of things that kind of creep in. And so, once you just kind of know what to expect, you can work with that. And then so for doing the other stuff I wanted to do, I'd never taken a lick of French ever before, and I basically taught myself how to speak French and read French. And so it's just one of those things where it's a really ambitious project. So to answer your question and go back to it, yeah, I always like a really hard challenge and try to pull off things that, shouldn't be feasible or possible, but I'm going to go for it anyways.
Yeah, and then look where you are now, with all this. So after all this research, so you were one of those people, you didn't know if they existed or what was going on, and now you find out there was in fact a sect of the Illuminati in Bavaria, and then there also was different sects. So what do you say to those people out there? There's a lot of people that are into alternative history, we could say conspiracy, whatever, but they don't believe that there's an Illuminati or there was an Illuminati. What do you say to those people?
Well, yeah, there most definitely was a historical group. What ends up happening is they have a very short life, from 1776 to roughly about 1788 when they stop pretty much operating in that capacity. There's letters and stuff that go to 92 and 93, and they'll use their order names in it, but it's mainly using their social network, say, hey, brother, such and such, can you get me a job over here? That sort of thing. So they're still using that network that they built, but ultimately they go away, and it's much ado about nothing, right? It's a grand utopian reform plan to basically enact a people's republic prior and in advance of the American Revolution. So it's really, you get some this weird philosophical and ideological things in there where it's somewhere between socialism and libertarianism. And the thing is, there's no example to copy off of because when much of this material was written, it's prior to the early American Republic. So there's not really an example, except for maybe the English Civil War, in the 1640s of a people's republic ever happening, right? So they kill the king, and then they get Cromwell, and then they go back to a monarchy and that sort of thing. So that's probably not even a good example. And so that's why you get this weird hybrid philosophy kind of going. And it's super unique stuff, and it's fascinating to me, right?
Yeah, it is fascinating. I love, learning about it. And it's great to talk to you, to someone who's actually went to the archives. That's like someone going to the Vatican archives and kind of figuring things out, So these are in some type of library. Is it a private library in Germany or?
Yeah, so the Secret State Archives, what they hold a lot of text. It's not just Masonic text. It just so happens to be that this is the repository for things. So kind of like when the Nazis came to power in 1933 or thereabouts, they kind of forcibly shut some lodges down, and then after that, everyone just starts handing in their papers. And so this division of the SS called the RSHA, they're looking for this Jewish plot or whatever that's working with the Freemasons, and they start seizing archives, not just in Germany, but as they would, in occupied countries, they would do this. And so pretty much the entire continental Europe history of Freemasonry was vacuumed up by the Nazis, save in Copenhagen and Denmark, and then also in Stockholm and Sweden. In both of those instances, in Copenhagen, they built a false wall to hide their archives, and the Nazis never figured it out. And so their archives are intact. in Stockholm, Sweden had a treaty with the Nazis. So basically, the Nazis could pass through and attack Finland, but they still didn't trust that would be okay, and they hid their archives as well. But they were never even attempted to be seized because they had like a non-aggression pact with Germany and that sort of thing. But so all this stuff gets vacuumed up. And at the end of the war, the Nazis take all this, and there's also a bunch of the final solution type papers, and they start hiding them in like salt mines and caves, like in what's today Poland or Silesia at the time. They start hiding these documents out. Well, the Soviets capture this material, and much of it sits in the Soviet archive in Moscow. And then after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Soviet Union goes sideways, and then they basically, by 93, they start sending stuff back. And by 2000, a vast majority of that material comes back, but not all of it. I mean, there's still like the Norwegian papers are still in Moscow. And then I've also started making some discoveries, too, that in Belarus, they have a number of French Masonic stuff, particularly from Bordeaux, that are still in their archive. One of them is actually a really important thing for my research on the Scottish Rite stuff. And we've got pictures of all this material. And ultimately, the goal would be to have this material go back to where it belongs. But, who knows if, when, or how that happens. Politically, things aren't probably the best with Russia and the rest of the world right now.
Yeah, this is probably not the time to be requesting that type of stuff, right?
Exactly. And the thing was, so like Secret State Archives, like they get the German Masonic material. So like if a lodge exists still after all the Second World War, and if it was reformed, they get their archives back, right? But the stuff for lodges that never were reformed or don't exist anymore, there's really no good place to send that stuff. And so they sent it to the Secret State Archives, Prussian Cultural Center in Berlin. And it's on the outskirts of Berlin, kind of by this town called Kleinmachnow. It's not very far from there.
Yeah, did you study any of the, of course, I know you have your great book, The Secret School of Wisdom, where you compiled, all that research that you've done. What about the other volumes? Did you look through those out of curiosity? Are you doing that now? What's going on with that?
Yeah. So I've not only have I gone through all that stuff like in person, but I've also got PDFs of all the microfilms. So like in the early 1900s or so, the Germans, the stuff they got back in the 1880s. There's a German historian, and his name can't think of it off the top of my head. But anyhow, he binds this material and puts it into an order that he thinks it in, because these materials are for the most part loose, and so he binds it into some kind of those 20 volumes we were talking about. But the organization's probably not the best, and there's a lot of stuff that's scattered, and you're like, what was that guy thinking? But I mean, you're talking about like 20,000 pages of material, so we can give him a pass here, right? I mean, it's not the end of the world, but like just kind of going through that material, there's really fascinating stuff. A lot of it's correspondence, a lot of it is member records and records of the little Minerval churches or lodges and so forth. And you put all these things back together, and you can really gain a great sense of it. And through that material, we're able to identify almost 1,700 members, and there's probably like 2,000 members total. We don't have a complete picture, but we've got a really good picture of what happened, right? And so what's interesting about all these materials, though, is we talked about Bode and then Ernst II, like their materials going to Sweden. Well, the Germans had requested this stuff back in the 1880s, right? So Bode was like this huge collector of Masonic materials, and he was doing a lot of it on behalf of Duke Ernst II, right? And so the Germans were kind of hacked off that they didn't get some of this material back. Well, when I went to Stockholm in 2016, I was going and I was researching stuff on the Scottish Rite, and they had found this seal for the emperors of the East and West. My good friend, Dr. Andreas Onefors, found this one thing that I'd never seen before. I was like, wow. So I was already doing a talk in Oslo. And then so after the conference, I hit a train over to Stockholm and, stayed for like a week there. I started digitizing. Well, so I'm staying like in the Grand Lodge of Sweden building, like in these servants' quarters. And what it is basically, it's like a former royal palace. And so, I get up in the morning, go down there, and in 15 minutes, I found the document I'm looking for. I'm like, well, now what do I do with my week? So, well, is there anything else you'd like to look at? And I was like, well, yeah. And I go, well, what's interesting? And they said, well, there's a section over here called foreign holdings. People don't really mess around a lot with that. Okay, well, let's take a look at there. Well, thank goodness I did, because basically they've got for every European country they've got a box for them. And some of these materials go back to the 1730s, right? And then so when I started digging through this stuff, I figured it out really quick that it was Boda's collection and Ernst II's collection. That's the bulk of what they call foreign holdings in Stockholm. It's priceless. I mean, this stuff, it looks as pristine as the day that it was written.
Wow.
So they're in fantastic condition. A lot of this material, some of it, hadn't been seen or looked at by people like in 80 plus years, right? And so this stuff's like kind of sealed up, and it's like with twine and these little wax seal type things. And you're like, and people are looking at it, and they're like, I was like, what do I do with this? And they go, we'll just cut it open. I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to cut this open then. And I started going through it. And then so I ended up with like something like 30,000 images, and I was taking like spreads of books, right? So I probably had like 60,000 pages worth of material that I got just in 1 week. And then so when I would go back to my room at nighttime, I would go and I'd write Art de Hoyos, who's kind of like my, one of my best friends and mentors. And I was like, hey, we've got to get over here and do this. And it took us 2 years to finally scheme out a way to get over there. And then so in 2018, we went over there and started digitizing everything for them. And it's really a good thing, too, because as we've gone through this stuff, we were able to look at all the different stuff in context, identify what these things are. And it has like literally the most rare of all rare things, because it's an intact archive all the way back, not disturbed by the Nazis. And plus the guys whose materials this stuff is, they were some of the biggest collectors at the time in the 18th century. And so really what we get is like the most complete view, not just in the Illuminati system or the Scottish Rite, but all systems, like every last bit of it. And so it's literally one of the most important archives in the entire world. And not only that, but they've got a massive collection of occult stuff too that was also from their stuff. I mean, so, and there's groups I've never even heard of. And then it also turns out that the King of Sweden was like an operative magician, back in the 18th century. And so there's this crazy stuff that you've never seen before, like all these texts and things. And we've got all this stuff digitized, and I've got more material than I can work with for the rest of my life. So kind of taking it all the way back around, so that Schwedenkiste stuff, what we're doing is there's the University of Erfurt is kind of got a project going, and we've made a thing called fatgrid.de. And what it is we're building an engine, and we're going to digitize. I had to get the Grand Lodge of the Three Globes in Berlin. I had to get the permission for it, and they've agreed. And so now we're digitizing and taking high-res photos of every page in the Schwedenkiste, and a lot of it's already been transcribed already. And the point is we've put it into this wiki engine that speaks all languages, and it's automated. So it's not perfect translations, but it's really, really, really good to where you can get a pretty good sense of it. And the best part is, people can contribute to this stuff. So we've taken all of that member information that we have in there, and the Schwedenkiste stuff is being scanned and entered into that system. And it's going to take time, but it's just now getting off the ground in the last few years. And so we're going to take all this material, and they've also now got a deal cut with the German National Biographical Database. So now we can reference these people. And then we started expanding out the idea and the project. And so we have French people contributing to the French Masonry, same thing with English people. And it's also starting to happen here a bit in the States too. And the point is like, maybe we cut off like at 1920 or so. So that way there's no one, for privacy reasons, there's no one living. So you're just looking at historical data for the most part. And then what we want to do is basically expand this stuff out. And this thing also uses AI as well. And what we can do is we can generate these images and these things like where you can cross-reference people, and it makes connections that you can't readily see, intuitively without like really close study. And, it's just all these different things that are all kind of coming together, and it's all in its infancy. But I think, maybe in a decade or so, we'll have something that's really fantastic.
Yeah, that's an incredible story. I mean, and this great work that you're doing. Explain to the audience the feeling you had when you're opening this up and you're cutting in and you're finding all this secret society stuff that you didn't know you'd find, and you're literally looking at it right away. How'd you feel then?
Well, yeah. So like the archivist Ulf Ozen, like he gave me this little like printed like kind of like 3x5 note card type thing, and it's like the finding aids. Well, the stuff's in Swedish, but it's close enough to German where I get about 95% of it. And so I'm kind of flipping through it, and I see this one that says Boda's ciphers, and I was like, well, I think we need to look at that box. And so that's the first one I pull out, and I crack it open, and he's got ciphers for every Masonic system that pretty much has ever existed. Like all their little ciphers and their keys, and he was really big in cryptography. And then like one of the things I figured out is like in the back of my book, in the appendix, there's this music cipher. It's like one of the last pages in the book. Like I think it's on the verso side of 448. Page 448, and like you look at it, and there's this music cipher. What you realize is that's Boda's contribution. He wrote this cipher for their national inspector. So like whoever's the head of whatever country, they can communicate back and forth, and it looks like music, but it's really they're actually saying something in the cipher. And there's no examples of it being used, but it's in the documents in the Schwedenkiste. And I'd always wondered where it came from, and I figured it out. Well, it was Boda's contribution after Weishaupt goes into exile. And so, that was really exciting. But I mean, the stuff that I saw in there, I mean, there's things going back to to 1730, and it just gets your heart racing because, I mean, you're looking at stuff that no one's seen and, God knows how long. But more importantly, even when they did see it, without studying things like I've studied, like the comprehension's not there. You're like, oh, that's nice. That's a ritual, or that's a piece of paper. But what does it mean? Well, I don't know, but it's kind of neat to look at. Well, the difference is I know what I'm looking at, and I know what it says, and that kind of thing. So it's one thing to look at something casually and not understand it, but would have comprehension of it, and then to hold it takes on a whole new value and meaning. And I mean, it's like one of the defining experiences of my life, just doing something like that, and really like stumbling and rediscovering a treasure. And so like when I found all that stuff and I knew it was Boda's for sure, I started writing my other academic friends in Germany, like Dr. Olaf Simmons, for instance. I was writing back and forth with him, and he's the one who's in charge of FatGrid, who built the whole thing. And so I started sending stuff to him. Well, then the German academics have now gone up there and have cataloged everything in that collection. And then also Reinhard, he went up there, it was like late 2015 or early 2016, right before I got there. And they called him in because they had this collection of books. Well, it was Boda's entire book library, except for a few copies were missing, right? And things happen. Maybe it walked off the shelf sometime in the past. We don't know what happened to it, but he was able to identify that stuff. So really what's coming together is one of the most important archives. Everybody's all starting to collaborate and work together. And really, what I tell a lot of people is right now we're in the golden age of research as far as Masonic or even some of these occult and magical systems. It's a golden age because previously this stuff had been off limits. People didn't have access to it. But what really ends up happening now is that these archives are opening up, and there's a new stance on this thing because, kind of like any initiatic system, you can read the rituals of a system, but it's not the same thing as experiencing it, although it does give you insight and understanding into the system, right? And so by doing all these things like that, we're able to put these things all back together in their proper context because, for too long, I think historians paid particular attention to, facts, figures, and hierarchies. And one of my friends, Niall Ferguson, he wrote in his book, The Square and the Tower, which I contributed some to in the Masonic and the Illuminati section on it. His kind of general thesis in that book is that, historians for too long have paid too close attention to hierarchies and not enough to networks, right? Well, it's the same kind of concept applies to this material where historians for such a long time had played, too close attention to really the hierarchical structure of things and then the minutes, meetings and stuff like that. But they overlooked the reason for being of the system, the ritual itself. What was the thing that united all these people together was the actual initiatic ritual type experience. And so without really looking at it or not being interested in it, you're missing the whole point for the reason for being of this system. And so that's why I think really what we're about to see in this golden age that, I and others like me are doing is we're kind of feeding this information. So now all these things that were kind of mentioned in books in the past, but without any context, we're providing that context. You can actually understand what was the point of it in the first place.
I agree. This is a golden age with all this information out there. You have these various secret societies where they have this secret information and this knowledge that was kept away for various reasons at that time. And now it's essentially being opened up, and people like you are able to research it. You studied German, for 8 years, you had mentioned, and it allowed you, after several years of studying the Illuminati and being in Freemasonry, you finally went to Germany. How many years was that into your research into the Illuminati that you finally went to see the archives?
Well, it took us 5 years to really get moving on it because I'd kind of kicked the idea around, and Reinhard kind of like dismissed it at first, and it was like, okay, yeah, nothing will ever happen from this. And so what I did, I reached out to Jiva, and because he had put this book out on Kniga, and what we did was we started like working on the printed rituals and stuff that was, all the exposures. We started working on those rituals, and we got about a third of the way into it. And then I emailed what we had done with Reinhardt, and I think he was blown away because, he didn't think I was really going to take it that seriously, but I was already off to the races. So then when he saw how far we had got, he goes, okay, I've got a couple suggestions. One, let's use the real rituals, not just the printed ones. But we started with the printed ones, right? Because that's where all the exposures were. As the transcript for it, and then we worked our way back through the actual manuscripts themselves. And there's quite a bit of variation there, right? So the stuff that they put into print, they didn't have the whole thing, right? They were just kind of truncating, and it probably wasn't for any nefarious reason. It was just for, space and whatnot, as far as like the cost of printing these things, because the cost of printing back then was not the same thing as the cost of printing today. That's kind of an interesting revelation. So what we ended up doing is just kind of working that whole thing through. And so all in all, like that Illuminati project was, from like 2010 on. So it was like, it's a 5-year project, but it was definitely worth it.
Definitely. And I interviewed Jiva, I believe, back in 2015. What ended up happening to him, if you don't mind I ask?
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to, say anything bad about Jiva. He's a wonderful person, but, he ended up taking his own life. And
I'm sorry.
Struggled. No, it's okay. I mean, he had struggled with depression and things like that in the years past. And I think I was actually one of the last people talking to him because we were working, and I've got going right now, like with this little side project of books called The Collected Works of Adam Weishaupt. And our goal is every book he ever wrote ever to put it not only back into print into the German, but also to do it in French and in English also. And so we've got one title in print. I've kind of been slacking on it, not for any good reason. We've got like almost 6 titles completed on it. It's just, life happens, right? Like, things like that. And then I'm also doing research in other areas. So it's just like kind of balancing one's time. And anyways, he was working on that first book, and he had pretty much wrapped up the whole thing. It was almost 100% complete. And, he'd been going through personal issues, and I'm not sure, what, if any, was his reasoning for it. And I know he had kind of maybe attempted something like this in the past before. And ultimately, it just ended up where he ended up taking his own life. And it sucks because, he was a great brother, a good friend. And it was senseless, but at the end of the day, you really can't rationalize these things because you don't know what he was feeling. And so all we can do is really just honor his memory because he did a fantastic job, and I really can't say enough nice things about him. And I miss him quite a bit, to be honest.
Sure. I was saddened when I heard the news. It's been several years. I recall now that you had mentioned that he did take his life. That was the way it happened. But I think, was it 2017, 16 in that area? Or?
No, he died back in 15, so it wasn't much longer. Yeah, it wasn't much longer after you interviewed him, I think.
Oh, wow. Okay. Wow. Yeah. What I'm going to do is I'll re-release that from the archives. And I'm going to just put it out there, and that way I'll put it with this one. I'll put yours, of course, the interview on Gnostic Warrior, just in his memory. That's a fantastic. Sad story, but yeah, life moves on, and in his memory. So, in any event, explain in your own words, Joe, what it means to be initiated and actually to go through these initiatic systems, and what it means to you.
Yeah. So, I mean, really, if you look at what's the whole reason for being for any system, right? There's some sort of secret teaching that they're trying to teach. And if you actually drill down into it, what is the, what is the whole point of any of these systems? If you look at the lessons and things they teach on paper and on surface, a lot of it's pretty common sense stuff, right? Say you take the golden rule, do unto others as they would have them do unto you, right? But the thing is, as profound as it sounds, people only value things for what they pay for it, right? And so really what the initiatic process does is it's actually a system of adding value, right? Because you could give a profound truth to someone that seems common sense, and yet common sense isn't common, right? But you do it under the guise of a ceremony with allegory and, just things that heighten an initiatic experience. What you really end up finding is that
The coronavirus is wreaking havoc upon the world, causing problems everywhere. The experts at Virus Safe Solutions have developed testing, disinfection services, and professional training for governments and businesses all over the globe. If you or your company needs assistance dealing with the coronavirus or you need a plan, please give the pros at Virus Safe Solutions a call at 619-586-5630 or visit them online at virussafesolutions.com. Again, that number is 619-586-5630 or visit their website at virussafesolutions.com. If you need a great and safe disinfectant to clean and protect yourself against the coronavirus and any of those unseen forces that seek to attack you, then you're going to want to get Pure Hydrogen Peroxide. It's made with food-grade hydrogen peroxide with no stabilizers or toxins, and it's one of the most powerful and safest disinfectants to kill the coronavirus. Do not use bleach, which is highly toxic and can cause severe respiratory problems for humans and pets, but instead use Pure Hydrogen Peroxide, safe for you, your pets, and the environment. Use code number 33 and get 10% off your next order by calling 760-237-0767 or visit them online at purehydrogenperoxide.com. Again, you can call them and get your bottle at 760-237-0767 or visit them online at purehydrogenperoxide.com. And don't forget to use code number 33 to get 10% off your next order. And now it's time for the Gnostic Warrior Podcast.
That's what gives the system value in the first place, right? So whereas before someone might, flippantly look past these things, it actually gives a value to the lesson being taught, and it makes an indelible mark in the mind of a person. And that's really the whole, the purpose of ritual, right? Or take a Christian thing, take baptism or something like that. It's symbolic of something, but it's the actual symbolic act of going through it. That's what gives that value, right? Because honestly, you could read the lessons in the Bible, but it's the actual experience of doing it, someone becoming a Christian, right? Through the process of doing it. And it's the same thing with Freemasonry or magical systems or occult systems or any system, right? And so it's that process. So one, it gives the system value, but two, it also gives you, camaraderie, whether it be, of a fraternal nature or, just people that, are like-minded, right? But it's the common tie that bonds all these people together. And, take Freemasonry, for instance, really having people of differing political and religious affiliations and associations, people that normally wouldn't have been involved with each other, and not because they don't like each other, but just because they don't cross paths. That's really the value of any type of initiatic system also, is that it unites these people together because they have a common shared experience. And so it's one of the kind of neat things about it, is that it really brings people together, I think.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I like to think of things sometimes metaphysically, and sometimes, maybe what's going on in the unseen world. And what I see, you have in science where they say you're like the 5 people you're around the most. So if you think about it metaphysically, you have this initiatic system, and many of these systems, they go back hundreds of years, and there's been initiatic systems for thousands of years into different secret societies and brotherhoods. I think there's some type of metaphysical thing happening, and then you have, as you had said, the camaraderie between the brothers, and then you have similar goals and similar rights, and it seems like it would be much more powerful when it's contained, and those rights are honored and they're kept forth, and you have people that really have their heart into this, as opposed to just there for just to do the ritual for, and eat some spaghetti or something, I think that's what some people have a view of when they see it. And of course, there are some people that do that, and they really don't put their heart into it, and they don't put their research, they don't read, they don't gain knowledge. But of course, there's people from all sides of the spectrum. But what do you think about the metaphysical aspect? Do you feel like you've gained more power? Not power like, I'm some high person in society, but more power as a person and more energy and more positivity and being a better person?
Oh yeah, I mean it totally adds to the vibrancy of life, right? I mean, if you look at it's crazy because like not like in a literal sense, but like when you're touching old papers and stuff like that, they speak to you, not like like a little voice on your shoulder or anything. That's kind of creepy, but more like you're literally holding a piece of paper that someone hundreds of years ago, was writing with a feather on a piece of paper made out of the rags of someone, some God knows how many people's shirts or whatever like that, and it's put on this paper. And it's, this paper at the time was really, really expensive, right? So like you can appreciate just by doing it, one, the time that went into creating this thing, two, the value that went into creating this thing, and it speaks to something. And so like what it is like this person hundreds of years ago valued this system so much that they took the time to either write it themselves or pay a scribe or someone to copy it, and not at a little expense, at a great expense. They valued the system so much, and so it adds value just like in a metaphysical sense, in that like there's a transference, right? And so really by doing all this stuff like that, although these people physically died, they didn't die at all, and their ideas didn't die at all either. They were preserved for time, right? And so much in the way that like now that Jiva's passed, he's immortal though because he contributed things to books, right? And these are the thoughts that were in his mind that he committed to paper, and so yet he still lives, right? And so long after I'm shoveled into the ground, maybe 100, 200 years from now, people will look at the stuff that I contributed to, and in that sense, I obtained immortality. You know what I mean?
I agree with you 100%. I mean, you look at all the writers that have written before, and actually the way that we are, our societies, all across the world, we're all digitizing and we're preserving this. We're you're seeing, the burning of books here and there, but I don't think that's going to happen ever again. And they're digitizing everything. You see everything going online, and then there's people like you doing it and realizing the value. And I love that you use that word transference. That's an important thing that I believe that happens when you take up the great work. It's as if we're taking on the baton from that person, and especially if you're first generation writing about it. I mean, and I look at it, you were the one that actually was some of the first people, of course, with your colleagues, your brothers, that went into these archives and did the work, and that transference happened. And I think there is almost as if these people are talking to you, and it's like, if it talks to you in your soul, then it's happened to me when I've researched things, and it's like, I've got to write about this. I've got to talk about it. And just this thing that drives us, and especially writers and authors and researchers, there's this weird thing that we all have, and we're all a little bit mad in our own ways, so
100%.
Yeah.
Maybe 120%. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So talk about, as far as Freemasonry, we'll get into that in a second, but talk about the actual guys that were involved in the Illuminati. Start with, some brief biographies of what you know about them, Adam Weishaupt and so forth.
Yeah, so Weishaupt, he's and again, you could, if you want to get like a little bit more in depth to it, like you can watch we've got that movie on Amazon right now, Illuminated. So if you want to see some of the ceremonies kind of acted out, and also to kind of do a little slightly deeper dive than we'll go into right now, you can watch that one. But so Weishaupt, he was orphaned at an early age. Both of his parents died. And back then, like, especially in Catholic countries, like you had godparents, right? And the reason you had godparents was because mortality was so high. And so he was raised by his godfather, the Baron von Ickstadt, who was a professor and also the book censor at Ingolstadt University, right? So Weishaupt grows up without his parents, right? So he's got a traumatic early experience. Both parents are gone. He's raised by a godfather who, on the one hand, is taking care of him, but two, is not a blood relation. He's a total stranger, right? So you can imagine the trauma that would inflict on a person. And so he grows up reading all the books in his godfather's archive that you're not supposed to be reading. These are all the bad books, according to the church. And so he's reading all these books you're not supposed to. And so it kind of drives him on, right? And so by like 73, 74, he's talking to students and he's getting an idea. And secret societies are in vogue, not just with Freemasonry, but other systems too. And so he's kind of kicking the idea around with his students, right? And so like the whole like intellectual backdrop is that the Enlightenment, really it starts as like early as the 1690s in England and kind of spreads outward, right? And what ends up happening is that Germany is really late to the party. And so it's like Frederick the Great, after the conclusion of the 7 Years' War in 1763, he enacts a policy called enlightened absolutism, or as I like to call it, enlightened despotism. And so it's like, by royal decree, you will be free. We will have agrarian land before us. We will abolish serfdom. You will be educated. And so it's autocratic in the way that it's enacted, but what it does is it allows the Enlightenment, all these ideas that had been suppressed hitherto, that Germany was late to the party at getting at, it kind of starts going in vogue, right? And so, like in the Protestant North, like Prussia, is Berlin basically is that part of Germany. It's sort of in the north. It's Protestant in the north and Catholic in the south. So the Protestants take to it rather quickly, and then the South not so much. So Bavaria, is like in the southwest of Germany, right? And so they're late to the party. They're, for the most part, Catholic influenced. And so the Jesuit order had suppressed a lot of these ideas. And so like all popular philosophical books and the academic curriculum at universities are replaced with, studying the works of the early church fathers and so forth, right? So it's kind of a counter-enlightenment movement as far as education and academia goes. So Weishaupt and his pupils, they start getting the idea of forming a secret society. And the whole purpose of it is to teach these things, these books and ideas that have been suppressed hitherto, basically to start teaching these things. And he can't do it in a public setting, right? And so a couple things happen. The Jesuit order gets disbanded in 1774. And so Weishaupt is the first non-Jesuit to take the position of professor of canon law. And that's not really well received by his, former Jesuit colleagues and peers. And so they kind of like withhold his paychecks. And so that kind of makes him extra, hostile towards these people, right? And so when they form the Illuminati, it's first the Order of the Perfectibilist, right? Because he believes in the infinite perfectibility of man, not as a utopian idea, but as a physically obtainable thing. But the thing is, it's totally utopian, to be quite honest. But that's what ends up happening. And so, in its early days, the Illuminati itself is more like a college fraternity. It's not plugged into Freemasonry. It's its own standalone system. But as these guys start graduating in like 1777, 1778, they start going out into the world and start joining lodges. Weishaupt himself in 1777 joins a local lodge that's running the strict observance system. And he makes it to fellowcraft. And he just basically stops going because what his great idea is if we can kind of like tie our system into the Masonic system, we can get members and more importantly money. Because if you think about it, like college kids, they don't really have a lot of cash, and college professors are pretty much in the same boat. And so that's one of the fatal weaknesses of their system in general is they didn't have prescribed degree fees or anything. It's like, we'll just donate what you can. Well, if you don't have a lot to start with, you're not probably putting a lot into it. And so it made it necessary to expand their system. And so Weishaupt's original plan is to reform society, and he wants to have like a more like a people's religion, which sounds a lot like deism, to be quite honest. And that's probably what the kind of vein that they're working in. And also like a political reform, like where he wants like a people's republic, right? In the sense that, but it's almost more like like a system of anarchy in the sense that like, well, hey, if people are capable of governing themselves, they don't really have a need for central government per se, right? And again, totally utopian ideas, but he's not really working off of like any solid basis of any system that existed until this time. And so, that kind of system gets going. So he's like the major actor, gets the thing started. But fatal weaknesses for the guy is he's not really a great ritualist. And so like in the early drafts of like his stuff that he cranks out, he drags his feet to produce anything. And that's not really what his strong point is, because his strong point is he's an ideas person, he's a professor, right? And so the order almost ends up being exterminated, just by, his delaying and, infighting and so forth. And he's kind of got a despotic, almost sociopathic type character where like he's like He's the head of this system, and it's supposed to be democratically ran, but really he's an autocrat. And so these people, like in his thing that he calls the Areopagus, like his early students, as they start expanding out, they don't really like this kind of the way he's dealing. It's like you're trying to make a democratic type system, and yet you're running it like a despot. Well, something happens in 1780, and Baron Adolf von Knigge, he ends up joining the system, and the guy's a rock star, and he's a high-ranking member of this system called the Strict Observance, which is the dominant right in Germany at this point, although the Strict Observance at this point is in terminal decline because their founder, Baron von Hund, when he dies in 1776, they're supposed to be led by these unknown superiors, but the thing is they don't exist. They just, it's not real. It's a system that he invented off of an earlier French system he was initiated into, but hadn't practiced for a long time. So he kind of freewheels and writes a lot of the ritual on his own. When he dies, they're supposed to be led by these unknown superiors. Well, they don't exist, and people start realizing what happened here. And so Knigge is ready to reform this system and have a Masonic reform. And then he runs into this guy, the Marquis Costanzo di Costanzo, who is in the Areopagus for the Illuminati, and he says, well, hey, why do you want to write a new system? You can join the very thing you're already looking for. And so he basically joins the Illuminati, starts recruiting all these guys from the Strict Observance that's going into terminal decline, and ultimately in 1782 at the Congress of Wilhelmsbad, they call for these unknown superiors to show up. They don't exist, and they strike down the whole system basically. And so, like the result of the Congress of Wilhelmsbad is you get the rectified Scottish Rite. You had guys from the Golden and Rosy Cross, Illuminati guys, and representing the system, and then you also had Villermoz and those guys. And ultimately, the guy Villermoz's system, the rectified Scottish Rite. They ended up taking the day there, and so that's kind of the conclusion of it. So it's like you can't be Knights Templar, but you can be the beneficent Knights of the Holy City. So it's it's linguistic type stuff, a little bit of wordsmithing, and a whole lot more spiritual emphasis, like more like Christian mysticism is what those guys were doing. In any case, what ends up happening though is that ultimately Knigge, he joins the system and he's wanting to reform it, but the thing is, there's not. He starts advancing people really quickly, and he's needing more rituals, right? But they don't exist, and so Weishaupt gets him to collaborate. So, Knigge's at a crossroads here. He can join a system that he now knows is a fraud, also, or he can step into that role and author the system. And so, what he ultimately does is he ends up writing the rituals, the ceremonial type stuff, right? Because he's a high-ranking member of the Strict Observance. He's a ritualist, right? So this is exactly the kind of person Weishaupt needs to write the ceremonies. And so the deal is Knigge writes the ritual, Weishaupt writes the lectures for it, right? And so they kind of work together. Ultimately, though, Knigge's got the same complaint with Weishaupt because Weishaupt sees himself as the founder, but he's not capable of completing his own system, right? Whereas Knigge sees himself as the guy that saved the system from collapse and really authored the majority of it. And both are legitimate viewpoints. Ultimately, they come to blows with each other, and Knigge demits the order. And so the order starts going into terminal decline because if you got a guy that basically brings in over 3/4 of the members, directly and indirectly, and he quits the system, that raises a few eyebrows. And so that's what ends up happening is they start going to terminal decline. At about the same point in time, the Bavarian elector Karl Theodor, who basically hit the guy that was before him was Maximilian III, and he died without an heir. So, and he was the guy that also Maximilian III brought in the Bavarian Academy of Sciences and started kind of like bringing the Enlightenment in. And that's one of the other reasons why they formed it is because just as these things started happening, he dies, and his cousin Karl Theodor becomes the elector. And so the first thing he does is he starts putting back in censorship. He starts putting these former Jesuits back into high places and so forth like that. So from Weishaupt's perspective, just as like the Enlightenment's coming in, it gets snatched out from underneath him. And so that's one of the other reasons why they formed the Illuminati order in the first place. And so what ends up happening, though, is long story short is Karl Theodor doesn't really care too much about Bavaria. He was never supposed to have had power in the first place. And so he's got a deal cut with Austria where, like, when he comes into power, he cedes the western strip of Bavaria to Austria just right off the bat, right? And he gets some little title from Austria, and that's great and everything. But what he really wants is he doesn't like Bavaria at all. He wants to go up to the Netherlands and get a crown up there. So he has this scheme with Maria Theresa where he's going to he'll take a crown in the Netherlands and he's just going to cede all of Bavaria to Austria, right? And the people catch wind of it. Some of his correspondence gets publicized, right? And so one of the things they did was they took the whole Illuminati scare. Part of it was like a misdirection for that scandal that he got caught up in. And so what ends up happening is he kind of deflects away and like really just throws them up under the bus, right? And I'm not saying that the Illuminati had the best of intentions. They definitely were definitely getting positions of power and giving it to their members and stuff like that. And their ultimate goal was a political and religious reform of the system. But that's not why they were persecuted. It was a convenient distraction to deflect away from like basically the effective head of that German state trying to cede said German state to a foreign power.
Just a little thing there,
Minor issue. Come on. Fake news.
That's fascinating stuff. When you say they were persecuted, none of them were burned at the stake or anything. They were just literally shut down and everything seized from them. Is that what happened?
Yeah, generally there was 3 edicts. I think actually there were 5 edicts altogether, but like 3 major ones, and like some of the lesser ones were like reinforcements and reiterations of the same thing that was already said before. But so the first one is like, hey, all secret societies need to stop. We're not going to do that. Those are bad. That's Edict 1. Edict 2 is like, no, we're serious, and we're talking about you, the Illuminati. And then finally, by the time they get to that 3rd edict, they're like, all right, look, you guys didn't listen. I guess you don't care about getting arrested, so if we catch you, we're going to kill you, basically. No one got executed, to be honest. I mean, but what it was effectively slamming the door on it because, you got these guys trying to organize for a political reform. And so what they want to do is shut the door on that right there because, people that are in positions of power really don't want to lose it very much. And they kind of like the way things are operating already. And
always.
So that's what yeah, always.
So talk a little bit about the conspiracy side, more to address, what happened where the Illuminati became like the number one kind of conspiracy, the weird type of stuff out there, and you see celebrities and stuff like that. And then you get all the people that have not done their research and, it's just this weird conspiracy going. Has there been anything that you have found in your research that may have caused this, or is it just because of
plenty, man.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I really if you want to look at it, you've got like a contemporary conspiracy that's like happening like in the 18th century. Then you've got like the whole modern variant of it, right? So addressing the contemporary one. So Robeson and Barruel, they both write against the Illuminati, and they've got their own different motivations. So Barruel's thing is he's a former abbey of the Catholic Church, and this is in the 1798, right? So the French Revolution, all the crazy stuff has already happened at this point. And so basically there was a report, and I've got an original actually of this report in 1784 from this the guy who's the architect of the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. He's writing to some guy in Bavaria, and this is like real early stuff, and that's I think kind of like where they get the idea to go persecute him anyways. And it's a copy, the manuscript I have is a copy of the original. And so he names all these people by name, right? Like all the guys that are like the heads of the system. Except for Weishaupt. They didn't know who he was, but they knew who everybody else was, basically. And it was from a Masonic context saying, hey, yeah, they started their lodge, this, that, and the other. Yeah, we hear they're doing bad stuff. Why don't you go ahead and take a look at them? So that's what they do. And so anyways, like the whole like Barruel's angle is that based on some of this earlier stuff and also in the exposures, because after the Illuminati were exposed, there was like a printing war where they were exposing parts of the ritual, and there was pro sides and anti sides, and they're both like in this like print war that runs right up until like, I don't know, like 1795 or so. And so what I'm getting at is all these conspiracy things are based on the published stuff. So, and the main people publishing against them is the Bavarian government itself. And then the people writing against them is like members, but they're writing under pen names or unattributed text. And so they're using this material, right? Well, Barruel takes it, and because there's like different lines in there, like in the correspondence and things that were seized, where it says that they'll go underground, they'll change their name. Well, that must mean that they caused the French Revolution. I mean, everybody knows that. And so that's his whole thing is like what happened to him and like the Catholic Church under France, where their property was seized. Priests and nuns were brutalized and murdered and executed and so forth. that's his whole angle. That's his motivation for writing what he wrote. He's explaining why this happened. It didn't just happen for no reason. People didn't spontaneously do this. This is a grand master plan. Can't you see it? They wrote about it before it happened, and it happened, right? And that's his perspective. Same thing with Robeson. He's a Freemason, and he also obtained the Scots Master degree, which was like the first high degree. And he does this stuff early on, but he's kind of turned into a bitter old man, and he too doesn't like what happened in the French Revolution, although he's an Anglophile and he doesn't really like the French very much either. And so they both use these sources. Well, in Robeson's case, he couldn't speak a lick of German, and so what it was, there's a British spy in Regensburg who was pumping him with all the printed materials, right, and telling him what the stuff said because he couldn't make sense of it anyways. So he's using secondhand information from the stuff that was printed as opposed to Barwell using the firsthand account. He's a church father; he can read the German stuff, right? And so they both write all their stuff and they're injecting their different ideological perspectives. So that's the reason for their conspiracy stuff happening in that contemporary period, right? A lot of that stuff lays dormant. And so let's skip forward. I mean, there's these little groups and stuff, and because they were exposed that kind of copied the name of Illuminati, even Crowley and some of those guys, going back to Theodore Royce and stuff, the guys that formed the Golden Dawn and also ended up making the OTO, those guys had also studied those papers that were available for anyone to study in Munich, which those papers got blown away in 1944 in a bombing raid. But the good news is most of that stuff was printed, so even though the physical ones are gone, it doesn't really matter because much of that material was preserved in print, thank goodness. In any case, they study it, but they take the whole 19th century perspective and they inject it because it's you go to the Age of Enlightenment versus the Romantic Age, right? And so they're more into occult knowledge and spiritual stuff. So they take the name Illuminati because it's popular, right? It's popular because they're the first real group outside of Freemasonry, because Freemasonry is a quasi-secret society, not really. Maybe in its earlier days it was more of one, but from today's context, it's not secret society at all, really. It's more like a social club in a lot of ways. But in any case, so those guys, they take that whole idea, the occult type movement that they're into and the whole Romantic period stuff. They take the name Illuminati and a couple degree names, and they use that because it's notorious already, right? And inject that stuff into what they're doing. Well, then flash forward to about 1900 or so, you get the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Well, there's no reference to the Illuminati, but there's a little passing quip about Freemasonry in there. Then Nesta Webster puts out her book, and then by the second edition of the Protocols, that's when they inject the stuff from Nesta Webster's book into the Illuminati stuff, right? And so this is at the 1930s at this point. You get Hitler's whole thing going on, but also as a counter to all that stuff, you get the John Birch Society, right? And those guys are something special. And this guy, Robert Welk, he basically builds on the stuff that's in Nesta Webster's book. And he has this whole lecture series called In Our Time. And you can watch the videos on YouTube. And if you want a good laugh, I'd go give that a listen. And, keep in mind, it's all it's garbage. But at the end of the day, that's his perspective too. And so what ends up happening is that somehow it not only is it the Nazis call Freemasonry and all that kind of stuff a Jewish conspiracy. Well, from Robert Welk and the John Birch Society's perspective, it's now a communist conspiracy. Weishaupt was the first communist, and then this guy Emanuel Josephson writes this book, Roosevelt's Communist Manifesto in 1955. He's a John Birch guy too. And in a lot of the stuff, the modern conspiracy theory stuff, you can read this book online. There are scans of it. And that you get the idea that the inverse of the dollar bill is the seal of the Illuminati. That's where that starts, is in that book right there. That Jefferson's in the Illuminati, that the Illuminati came here, and all this different stuff. And then, so I think you get guys like Robert Anton Wilson who are building on all this stuff, right? And he does it from just a pure a fiction standpoint. I don't, all the stuff that he writes, it's fiction, right? And it's because it's spurned on by the stuff that's happening. And then, so you got Wilson's stuff. And then by the early 90s, you get the whole patriot movement resurgence type thing, and then they start looking into it. And then so what ends up happening is the one thing you can see besides like Alex Jones and those guys, and like anywhere we're at today with the whole deal. But what you see is over time, because of their exposure and everything like that, everyone had their own axe to grind, basically. And so what ends up happening though is over time they all reference the same material and they all start layering it on top of each other. So it from the Nazis' perspective, it's a Jewish conspiracy. From the John Birch Society's and Patriot Movement's perspective, it's a communist conspiracy to make world government, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. And we all know the stories. And so that's really what's kind of fascinating about this whole thing. But the crazy deal is, in the English language, the only thing we've had accessible is original conspiracy theories, right? And so the thing was, like, I could see how people could fall into the pit trap if they didn't actually try digging it all. If they just took it at face value. Hey, this book's printed in 1798. Yeah, that's definitely a real conspiracy theory. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's conspiracy fact. But the thing is, if you don't investigate it, you don't realize it is for what it is. And so that's really what the thing is. It's like a giant layer cake, right? And it's all founded on like a conspiracy thing in the very beginning, right? And that's so it evolves over time. But also, I think like when you see like the halftime Super Bowl show and things like that, and all these different things, really it's a viral marketing strategy, right? So like if you go into Illuminati, like you go into Google Trends or whatever, you put in Freemasonry, like you see some peaks about the time Angels and Demons comes out. Do the same thing with the word Illuminati. And then like what you start seeing is like if you're doing viral marketing, you're a celebrity, right? If you can somehow either implicitly or explicitly connect yourself with some kind of secret society, it's got a big push in your numbers and your traction, right? So it's ad traffic, and it's using targeted keywords, whether implicit or implicitly, right? And then so take like the whole Super Bowl halftime show that everyone's all freaking out. It's like, well, until now, because we didn't have like any of the Illuminati rituals really into print, or people didn't even, and then now we got the movies, so you can actually see what they look like as opposed to just reading them. Yeah. So prior to our book and then now the movie coming out, you could have said anything was an Illuminati ritual and it would have been to your advantage. And so really what I think also we're seeing, like as far as popular culture is concerned, is a targeted, directed, focused, and intentional viral marketing campaign. That's just my opinion, though.
Do you believe that there's still, I mean, you have the various Illuminati sects, and then there was various spin-offs, and there's groups I know going now as well. Do you believe that they're still around? Do you believe that they're, being involved in what you've been, the research? Is there any type of secret society with that type of power, or not the power that they had because they didn't have much, but someone like that with that type of power in the world today?
Well, I mean, if you look at it, I don't really subscribe to that theory, and it's for this reason. I'm not sure if you're a Mason or not, Mo, but like if you are, like you go to lodge, do you see a lot of rich guys hanging out there? You don't, and the reason is because they're not worried about like trying to improve themselves or improve society or anything like that. They're concerned about amassing more wealth and more power. That's what drives these people, right? So hanging out in a group of people, or a group of guys. Trying to improve oneself, to do good for their community, that sort of thing like that. That's not what the motivating force is behind this thing. And that's why, like, why would someone, if the only finite resource we have in this life is time itself, our time on this plane of existence, it doesn't make any sense to waste that not achieving the goals and objectives you have. So, and I'm not saying that there's not a push for global governance. Yeah, there probably is. And maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. The jury's still out on that thing. But what I do know is that as far as it being like an organized secret society plot, it's not necessary because those guys don't hang out in any of those things. And I'm a member of many different lodges and systems and so forth. I don't see these people there. These aren't the guys that are hanging out there because they don't need to, because, if you're super wealthy and super powerful, you've got better things to do with your time, quite frankly, to amass more wealth and more power. And that's what motivates them, right? They're not like us, where they want to be a better person and do better for the world, that kind of thing. Does that make sense? Yeah,
total sense. Makes total sense. Yeah, and to answer your question, just a different type of Freemasonry, a member of the United Traditionalist Grand Sanctuaries of Ancient and Primitive Rite of Memphis Mizraim.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so a little bit different symbolic Masonry. Traditionalist is kind of what it's about. And then I'm also a member of the Scholarly and Political Order of the Illuminati.
Oh,
that's
neat. I've actually read about that.
yeah, yeah, and it's a great organization. The Meaning of Being Illuminati is our Grandmaster's book, Dr. Nicholas Leos, and definitely something that you should look into. And it's, I think, one of the new premier orders, to be honest with you. And again, I mean, no disrespect, he's been a member of many different types of Freemasonic lodges and so forth. But yeah, just been doing this a long time like you have, and
Yeah.
feel like this is more along the lines of my goals and what I want to do, and it's more esoteric, but I also have been seeing the work that you've been doing, of course, Arturo, and then also Angel Miller, and there's a lot of great
Yeah.
authors now, that are, either members of the United Grand Lodge or Scottish Rite Freemasons and so forth. Yeah. How hard is it to get a 33rd degree Scottish Rite? Do you know if there's is it just something that happens eventually? You have no idea as far as the Scottish Rite is concerned?
Well, I mean, as far as what they say is if you chase after it, you're not likely to get it, right? And that's the thing is, all these different Masonic systems, your system, my system, it's the same. It's the same thing. It's all about dedication, service, improving oneself, improving one's community. Just being a better person, both physically, spiritually, and so forth like that. And so, if you're like a ring knocker, a ladder climber, and one of those type of people, occasionally they'll get to the highest places, right? But not often. Once they're found out, they're usually turned away pretty quickly. And so the way, if one wanted to become a 33rd degree, one would have to spend a lot of time in one's valley, doing, work in the valley, maybe at different reunions, or maybe they're not inclined at being, taking part in the rituals. Maybe they're a cook or something like that. Maybe just working in the kitchen. I mean, there's different ways to get there. But the point is if you're going after it with the intent to have it, you're not the kind of person that deserves something like that. The highest thing, it's kind of like a meritocracy in a sense. And from that perspective, I think it's totally a good thing, because those are the people you don't want running or having any kind of power. Does that make sense?
Total sense. And we, our brothers, we agree with that 100%, and totally operate on the other aspect of it. And that's the way it's supposed to be. And I think I see things changing as well. And the other side of Freemasonry, slowly but surely. And again, I'm not a brother as far as of the Scottish Rite or the United Grand Lodge, but I'm seeing some great things as well happening. But what's next for Joe? What do you have planned? Another book or?
Oh, infinite books. So I got to catch up my series on Vice Hopped. And so my patron on those, he's like, hey, we got to get these books out here. So I've got 5 of those I'm sitting on. All I lack is introductions. Work's totally done. It just needs typesetting and to go. So I got to bring at least one of those online this year. Also, the stuff for the Scottish Rite, there's this thing called the Sharp Documents, and also called the stuff Chemitsky had, which is supposedly this bogus Ukrainian Grand Lodge stuff, and also the Grand Orient also had materials on Marin. And so what we did is we took all that stuff, we professionally translated it, we're going to reproduce it with images. All the work's done. We're just assembling books right now, getting ready to print that. I've also discovered the source rituals for the Scottish Rite. It's this thing called the Balo manuscript. It's Marin's manuscript, and I can't talk specifically about it, but there's a little Easter egg in there. I think people will be pleasantly surprised when they see what we have, because what we've basically done, the Sharp document stuff covers the correspondence back and forth of that early system, the Alou Parfait, as it transitioned also into the Order of the Royal Secret. And so when you take all that stuff, we now can actually identify and have our history. And the reason it hasn't been done till now is this stuff's scattered all over different places. And it took, a couple hundred years of scholarship to tie down the system. And it wasn't that it was intentionally obscured and hidden. Just, things get scattered, people die, things get forgotten. And so it took someone running this stuff down. And so this year you'll see all the correspondence type stuff come out. It's going to be in 3 volumes because it's massive. I mean, we've probably got 1,500 pages of it. But the earliest rituals, from that Scots Master, the transitional Scots Master that Marin receives in 45, In Antigua, from Governor William Matthews, we have that earliest ritual in all of its ritual forms going up to like 1763, thereabouts. And so what you'll do is you'll be able to look at the system as it was, as it evolved. Then you'll have the Balo manuscript, which is the source ritual for those Franken manuscripts. It's what Franken translated. And what we're doing basically is all the missing pieces in our history. We're answering all that stuff right now. And, all the work's done on this stuff. It's just we're going to do all the sharp stuff, the 3-volume set this year. The next year is Balo with its little Easter egg friend that people will freak out when they see what it is. That's going to be coming. I'm also working right now on Rectified Scottish Rite. We did the whole Elu Cohen system based on manuscripts. It's typeset, ready to go. Hellfire's putting that one out, I believe, this year, although they were supposed to have already started marketing last month. But, patience is a virtue, so we'll just have to be patient there. Yeah. And then we're doing – go ahead.
You don't have a blog, do you, or website?
No, I just kind of do my thing.
Gotcha. No, I was
you
just
can
saying.
go to MaltaMinervalEditions.com. That's like that's where like the Vice Hot books are going to be at.
Okay.
And we've got a section for a blog in there, but honestly, I like the research. I really, really like the research. And so in any case, like, yeah. And then so we're doing the strict observance system. We've already completed the 1750s German Golden Rosy Cross system. So like the so-called Masonic Rosicrucians, no one's known about their ritual at all, and so we found the earliest manuscript from 1768, and we've also got all the variant reforms from 1777 and also 1788 included in there. And so now we can actually know what the Golden Rosy Cross was actually doing. But sadly, their 10th degree, can't find a copy of it anywhere. And I've been to all the different archives. It may exist somewhere, but it's not in an obvious place. But we will get it, just not anytime soon. And so, yeah, that's like I said, like my goal is before I hit 40, all major Masonic high degree systems. So what I've basically done is we've got the Illuminati out of the way. We've got the Elu Cohen out of the way. We've got what becomes the Scottish Rite out of the way. We've got the Golden Rosy Cross out of the way. And so really all that kind of remains is for me to get to is Rectified Scottish Rite. Swedish Rite stuff, I can't touch it because it's an active system, but I did find in Sweden the earliest stuff for what becomes the Royal Arch and ultimately becomes our American York Rite system, all those high degrees that are Dunkerley's high degrees. And not only do I have that, but in that set that from there's the oldest copy of the Royal Arch in English, which is like 1766, and it's in manuscript form. And what's crazy about it is the form it's in really closely aligns to what the French were writing. And it was there's a manuscript like in 1780 called the Sheffield manuscript. And what we're seeing is the system evolving, right? So people have gone back to it and say, well, these things don't align. Well, that's because you're working from a 1780 manuscript, and the original one, which was probably, put down on paper, I don't know, like maybe 1750 something, you got to get a little bit closer to it. And so that's what's going to be really exciting about those English high degrees. So, I mean, there's going to be other systems and things I do. And like a thing I want to do, like after I hit 40 and I want to get a new project, I'm probably going to go and start doing like all the, the co-Masonic and also the women's systems too. And I've got a couple of different like unknown, paramasonic secret societies that involve women in them too. And I think that's also worthy too, because a lot of that's been ignored. And it's not to say that like as far as like mainstream masonry in America and England and the English speaking world goes, women really can't be a part of that stuff, but that's not necessarily true. And there's contemporary examples for this stuff. And I think that's important because like we're missing like a whole side of the history here. And I don't think it's for any deliberate reason other than just people, I guess, haven't been interested and written very much on it. And also there's the accessibility issue. So, it's a project for later.
Yeah, and that's great that you're doing that work and you're paying attention to the other co-Masonic orders and so forth. I think it's important that stuff is studying and the research is put out there. So it's great you're doing that. The Secret School of Wisdom, the Authentic Rituals and Doctrines of the Illuminati, that is Joseph Wage's great book. It's on Amazon for those of you who would like more information. That's what we've been talking about today. I really thank you for your time. I've learned a lot. I could talk for another hour. I know you're short on time, but and it's 3 hours ahead of time over here, right? Where are you
right
at? Yeah. So Yeah, definitely. So we'll talk in the future, and I look forward to your books, and thank you again for your time, Joe.
Well, fantastic, Mo, and thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
The coronavirus is wreaking havoc upon the world, causing problems everywhere. The experts at Virus Safe Solutions have developed testing, disinfection services, and professional training for governments and businesses all over the globe. If you or your company needs assistance dealing with the coronavirus or you need a plan, please give the pros at Virus Safe Solutions a call at 619-586-5630 or visit them online at virussafesolutions.com. Again, that number is 619-586-5630 or visit their website at virussafesolutions.com. If you need a great and safe disinfectant to clean and protect yourself against the coronavirus and any of those unseen forces that seek to attack you, then you're going to want to get Pure Hydrogen Peroxide. It's made with food-grade hydrogen peroxide with no stabilizers or toxins, and it's one of the most powerful and safest disinfectants to kill the coronavirus. Do not use bleach, which is highly toxic and can cause severe respiratory problems for humans and pets, but instead use Pure Hydrogen Peroxide, safe for you, your pets, and the environment. Use code number 33 and get 10% off your next order by calling 760-237-0767 or visit them online at purehydrogenperoxide.com. Again, you can call them and get your bottle at 760-237-0767 or visit them online at purehydrogenperoxide.com. And don't forget to use code number 33 to get 10% off your next order.